the fact that us human beings are affecting, we are affecting the geology of our planet. So it's a project that started with different angles. Nicolas and Maria would have a different angle, but for me it started as a person working with digital technologies and who started noticing that things like smartphone, screens, computers, video game consoles, we have them at home or in our pockets, but we can also find them on, this is a beach in Guadeloupe in France. So that's like the kind of situations we're in, and I'm truly not satisfied by that. But I started like noticing how the digital, among many other people, I started noticing that the digital, you can find it in a lot of places, and it become this kind of, I would not say geological phenomenon, but it started being present also in the environment as discarded electronics and as artificial things. Like for instance, this is a tree that was built in one day. This is in Cabo Verde. It's not a tree. It's a cell phone antenna. You may have seen some of them. There are countries where, like, this is forbidden. For instance, in Switzerland, you can't disguise or create an antenna tree with this kind of shape. But in other countries, it's not the case. So when I started noticing those things, I started compiling examples like that. Examples of things that looks like nature but are not really natural, or things which are natural but somehow they're affected by the fact that we have technologies. Things like that. I guess you know what this is. Like the good old Tamagotchi, so sort of artificial creatures. So I started like having this kind of notebook with examples of how different kind of specimens could help us understand the Anthropocene. This is called Fordite or Detroit agate. It looks like a mineral, but it's not a mineral. It's just like a sort of it's different layers of paint that were used in the 30s and the 40s when cars were painted, and it has this kind of very mineral kind of aesthetic and character. You can find them on different platforms. I guess you can find them on eBay, for instance. But it's not a mineral. It looks like a mineral, but it's not a mineral. So this is typically the kind of thing that I started compiling, and meaning Nicolas and Maria from this innovation, we noticed that we had this kind of common interest about the artificialization of the planet, and we started sharing our own notes about the specimen we collected, and we decided that it would be interesting to do an exhibit about those things and try to find a way to exhibit those specimens. Could be minerals, could be flora, fauna. And we started discussing different formats. We had the observations, we had plenty of observation, but the point was to try to understand what kind of format would make sense for this kind of observation. So we looked at, like, obviously, like the very scientific kind of drawings. We looked at the way like bestiaries or compilation of specimen exist in different cultural contexts. For instance, in folklore or in the context of role-playing games. Role-playing games have somehow reinterpreted folklore and folkloric books to, well, illustrate somehow what creatures are on the planet. Not just the way they look, but also their symbolic kind of character. And obviously, the most interesting format we found was to look back in time and look at the Middle Ages. And in the Middle Ages, you had books like this one, like the Westminster Bestiary or Le Bestiaire d'Amour. Like, there were plenty of different bestiaries about beasts, animals. You also had like ones about minerals, lapidaria. You had ones about vegetables as well. And the reason why they were interested in these books were both because, I mean, from an aesthetic perspective, they combine text with illustrations, but also because the text was written with some kind of moral perspective. Those books, they were really influenced by the Christian theology and the fact that in the Genesis, God gave the right or the possibility to human or ask humans to name objects, animals, creatures, and actually gave Adam, not Eve. So that's obviously a problem. But we found that this was interesting as some kind of metaphor, because obviously, since human beings created the mess, and certain kind of human beings created the mess we're in with the Anthropocene, it would be interesting to take that kind of metaphor where the symbolic or the moral character of certain species were discussed in those bestiaries, and use that to describe things like antenna trees, COVID, etc., etc. So we started working with, and it's Maria who did like the illustration. We started figuring out who would be the right balance between the very modern and scientific kind of ways of illustrating the specimen and writing text which describe the problems or the sort of factual description of each of those things. For instance, this is a plastiglomerate. It's a mix of basalt, the sort of minerals you get when you have a volcanic eruption, but it's made with basalt and plastic, because if you had plastic, for instance, I was in Canaria recently, and there was like an eruption few years ago. So if you had plastic on the way, plastic and basaltic minerals mixed, and it led to this kind of new sort of type of mineral, which is called plastiglomerate. So we did like series of illustration like that, shown that in different museum in Paris, in Montreal, and discussing at the time with Frick Lom from Onomatope, we discussed it would be interesting to do a proper bestiary, and a proper bestiary would exist in the context of a book, and a book with a series of illustrations and text that try to compile the different specimens we had, and we asked a certain numbers of researchers to reflect on those things. Pierre-Olivier Dittmar, for instance, who's a medieval researcher, wrote about the importance of medieval bestiaries and how they were used as a way to observe the world at a certain moment in time, which could be contrasted or compared to what we do here. There's a text by Anat Singh about unintentional design, about the way us humans created object without any proper intention, but it had dramatic consequences. So you have plenty of texts like that. I don't want to spend too much time commenting them, but the idea would be to have, I mean, it's a bit like the book of assignments that I presented before, except that here it's not assignments. It's sort of a book you carry with you, and try to notice those things in the environment. That one might be a bit tricky, but that one is like antenna trees could be found in a lot of different places. So the idea was to reinvent both the bestiary and all those field book, natural book that engage people in noticing things in the environment and giving people some kind of intellectual tools to understand what it is that they have under their eyes. And obviously, we also afterwards we did another series of exhibits. This one was in Geneva, in which we tried to find another format to like a scenography to describe a bestiary. So a way to observe. I mean, it's sort of meta kind of observation. Observe object in the context of this kind of place where you grow. Things like with this kind of light, it's used to grow plants even at night, and it's typically the sort of things that we have nowadays because of the sort of economic environment we're in, and we reuse that kind of scenography to present the different specimens. So it was a way somehow to take all those things that exist in the context of nature and put it back into one place and illustrate how to observe the bestiary. And one other project, this one called both with the Near Future Laboratory and the Design School in Geneva, started as a personal project, and then a project that I done with which currently underway, done with Etienne Mineur and Sabrina Calvo. It's a project about the Alps, and both the history and the transformation of the Alps and their future. It's a personal project because it started when I'm a French citizen and I applied for the citizenship in Geneva, in Switzerland. With the different cantons, you don't apply for Swiss citizenship, you apply for the citizenship of the canton you're in. So applying for the citizenship of Geneva, I started, you don't have to do that to become a Swiss, but I started reading books about all those people, all those travelers or researchers who in the 18th and 19th century were from Geneva or came to Geneva and went discovering the Alps. And there's some kind of there's a tradition of books about voyage dans les Alpes, alpine travels with like researchers like Horace Bénédicte de Saussure, Charles Bonnet, but also travelers, John Ruskin, Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, for instance. They had their books about their travel in the Alps. So as I'm always hiking or visiting the Alps, I started compiling my own notes about what it means to travel in the Alps these days. What does it mean in the context of the Anthropocene? What does it mean in the context of digital technologies and digital infrastructure spreading on the planet, both in, I mean, not just both, but in Switzerland, in France, in Italy, in Slovenia, in Austria, in Germany. And I started like documenting those things, and this is just examples of what it means to document all those changes on the planet. This is the Rhône glacier. As you can see, some people try to preserve the presence of the glacier because otherwise they will lose their ice cave and they will lose their business. So you can see that kind of like this is what the transformation of the Alps looks like. You have the glacier, which is really dirty, with this kind of dark surface because of like the climate change and sometimes pollution, and you have this kind of like plastic-based covers that sometimes people can find later down the river in the Rhône, and it's of course the image has a certain aesthetic and character, but this is depressing. This is another interesting example of how the Alps are changing. It's a place where, I mean, it's in the Bernese Alps, where a huge tunnel was built under the Lötschberg mountain. And when the tunnel was dug, the company who dug the tunnel discovered hot water and hot springs. So they built this kind of huge farm for fishes, sturgeons and certain kind of fishes, and they could also use that hot water to grow certain kind of plants. So it looks like I mean, it has this kind of architecture, and you can buy some coffee from the Bernese Alps because they grow coffee beans in there because of the hot water. Of course, I don't know if you can read it, but they don't have enough beans, so it's only 10%. It's coffee beans, 10% from the Alps and 90% from Colombia. But that's what coffee from the Alps looks like these days. Another example. This is sort of like interesting in terms of documenting the artificial presence of things on the planet. So it's an artificial lake because there's a dam that is used to create electricity. This is under the Saint Bernard Pass. And on this artificial lake, you have like those floating solar panels that are used to give electricity to the village that exist down the river. So you have this kind of double artificial layers that somehow illustrate what it means to I mean the electrical needs of citizens in the Alps. And of course it leads to certain kind of strange typology. You have very old building. This is called rustico in Ticino. They exist also in Italy, and by law you cannot change them. It has to look like this. You cannot add any other things. The only thing you can add is solar panels to give you electricity. So you have like people, and you have like phone antennas and this, and at the same time you have that kind of like architectural typology. So it's a bit like if you read the books by Bruce Sterling, he mentioned like this kind of I mean, this trend called Gothic high tech that somehow reflect on the fact that you have a mix of old architecture or things that have been they existed in the last centuries, and at the same time it's high tech because you have like electricity or a network technology. Other examples noticed along the way in the Alps, those are like huge antennas that are, it's in Leuk in Switzerland near the Rhone Valley, and you have 30 huge antennas like this that are used by both the Swiss institutions for telecommunications, but also, as we noticed in the documents that Edward Snowden published, it was used by the National Security Agency in the US to collect the data from Europeans, their emails and telecommunication, and is owned by a German slash Luxembourgian company. And it's typically the sort of things that you can find in such places, like really high tech. And on the other hand, you can find really low tech solution. This is this is called BIS. In French, and it's this kind of, it's a really like crude and basic technology that water canals that helps like the farmers to cultivate their different things using water that is somehow available in the forest and that can spread around the different mountains. So what I found interesting, like in this like 7 years project in the Alps, was to notice like the super high tech, the mix of high tech and low tech, and the low tech that all exemplify and illustrate the way human beings live in the context of the mountains. And it's probably not what you have in mind when we talk about the Alps, but that's typically what one can find. And that's going to be a book that is going to be published. So the book is going to be in French, called Alpine Metamorphosis somehow. So it's more like a nature writing slash like travel literature. And this is sort of a compilation of the observation I made. And as often as what's often the case in my work, what I try to do is to go beyond the observation and find a way to create something about those observations. In the context of the other two projects, it was a collaboration with Nicolas and Maria and do a book, a bestiary, and a series of exhibits. In the context of Dr. Smartphone was a book or a document that can allow to build certain kind of conversation with smartphone repairers. And here I was more interested in another kind of approach that I deal with my colleagues at the Near Future Laboratory, which is design fiction. Design fiction is a term coined by Bruce Sterling and Julian Blicker that describe the practice of creating tangible and evocative prototypes that exist in the near future. We speculate about their existence, and we do as if they already existed. We create basically fake product, fake object from the future. So that's like a manual of design fiction that we produced with the Near Future Laboratory recently. And I was interested in what would be some kind of design fiction that would help us think about the future of the Alps, mostly targeted at people in alpine regions. In the last 20 years, I've been mostly interested in like urban technologies or things that exist in an urban context, and working in the context of the Alps would be a way to ask a question about what it means to think about the future from a different kind of context, the alpine context, with mountains, with different kind of climates and different kind of issues. So for this, the format I was interested in was not necessarily the standard design fiction where we create fake object about the future. I was more interested in the fact that there in the Alps there's a tradition of games that help people situate what the Alps are. So this was an exhibit at the Museum of Mountains in Turin, in Torino. Joko is a jeu, a game. So I started collecting examples of games about mountains and realized that games would be interesting both to engage people in some kind of participative activity to think about the future. There's a whole tradition also in futures-oriented games. So I was interested in finding some kind of balance between observation and speculation and imagination. And obviously the kind of game I was interested in was, and I mean, this is like the probably a bit caricatural, but the role-playing games that have been produced in the last 40 years. This is the most canonical one, Dungeons and Dragons. I was not interested in like the very masculine or like fighting oriented kind of trend of those games, but more into the fact that those games, they do not necessarily, I mean, it's not like a video games where you see things. It's a game that is a structure, an infrastructure for imagining things, because those games are generally organized with a game master who start telling a story, and the different characters improvise orally. They just tell what their character are doing, and sometimes they need to test whether their actions could be done or not. It's done with dices, with Dungeons and Dragons. In the game that I'm designing with my colleagues, it's different, but I found that it's interesting as a way to not like prefigure or not like show people what the future is, but let people talk about those futures. And I started working with those two colleagues, Sabrina and Etienne. Etienne has a studio called Studio Volumique in Paris. And what we've done is to take all the material that I've collected, the environmental reports, the anecdotes and the field research that I presented before, the interviews I made with people, could be laymen or it could be experts in geology, in glaciology, in geography or anthropology, using that material to highlight a certain number of issues: climate change, mountains collapsing, new kind of ingredients that people use to create recipes, traditional recipes which are changed because of climate change or because of new tastes, new infrastructures, new controversies, plenty of things like that. And we use that kind of material to prototype a game that could be used very basically with 2 to 6 people. It's a role-playing game, so there's a game master and each person play a certain character with a certain role. Could be, I mean, depending on the scenarios, you could be a guide, you could be a tourist, you could be an activist, you can be, I mean, there's plenty of different categories that one choose at the beginning of the game, and the situation starts. Could be, for instance, an exploratory situations where you have to create a map of a new path, hiking path that exists because the glacier disappeared, or it could be like a scenario based on controversy. There's a electricity company that wants to build a dam at a place where there used to be a glacier, and that sparks controversies, and a ZAD, Zone à Défendre, like place where people protest with eco warrior and stuff like that. So this is a starting point that is basically connected to all the observations I made, and the idea is to let people have like a certain kind of discussion, which could be both fun, because first it's a game, but also it's a way to help them build some kind of narration about this situation and how people might live in the context of a new controversy, a new ecological issue in the future. So to some extent, it's a way to balance things that could be fun and entertaining with real issues that happens in the context of those places. And we're in the process of designing the different scenarios, working with different, we don't want to put too much visuals, but we're trying like different kind of combinations with paper-based format. The idea is that you have to collect your own material to play the game, so you don't have dices, but you have to collect like little stones on like near the place you play, and in order to test whether you manage to do an activity or not in the game, I used a game that existed in the alpine traditions with kids called jeu du grelot. It's like as if you do like you shake your hands with the different little stones. It makes a certain noise, and the people, the character need, if they want to succeed, they need to guess the number of stone like the game master as in his or her own hands. So what I tried to do was to use the observation I made on the field and turn that into a game, not something that would exist with, I mean, different kind of traditions. So it's basically reinventing the way people build narrations with all those different components. So it's going to be called Chamonix Sentinels. Etienne, the graphic designer, he's a big fan of the bestiary of the Anthropocene, and he said, okay, you did a book in black. The next book is about like snow, which is vanishing because it's in the Alps. It's going to be in white. So I'm going to print white on white. I don't know if it's going to be like that, but that's typically the sort of like design-based reasoning that I find interesting in the context of turning observation into some kind of speculation. And just as a conclusion, because I haven't shown like enough books, this one is just for me, it's the sort of thing that I'm trying to do in my own work. It's mixing investigation, observing, noticing with designing something. Of course, it could be a book, but it could also be an exhibit, could be some kind of participatory activity that can engage people in some kind of activity. But it's by going from the observation to design and design to observation that I try to build my own practice at the crossroad of anthropology and design. Thank you.